Thank you very much. Good. Thank you very much, Ted Vestal, for the opportunity to visit with you again. And for our viewers, please don't forget to subscribe, to share, and like our channel so that we can bring more quality products and quality information to you so that you can appreciate and follow the situation in Ethiopia. Thank you, Professor Ted Vestal. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to know about Ethiopia and the relationship, and so how long you've been involved in Ethiopian and understanding Ethiopian politics and the books you've written? If you can summarize those things, that would be helpful for our viewers.
When my connection to Ethiopia began with my Peace Corps service, in 1962, on the Ethiopian New Year's Day, I went to Washington, D.C. for an interview for this new organization known as the Peace Corps. And in the interview with Sergeant Shriver, he asked me if I would like to go to Ethiopia as an associate director of the Peace Corps. And I said yes, knowing very little about Africa or about Ethiopia at that time. So I began a long study of your homeland and of Africa generally, and ended up going to Ethiopia in 1964 with my family, three young children, as well as my wife. We lived in Addis Ababa for 2 years, and I traveled all over the country to all of the provinces that existed at that time as part of my Peace Corps work, visiting 584 Peace Corps volunteers all over the country. So I had a unique experience in being able to see all parts of your wonderful land. And when I finished my service as a Peace Corps officer, I became interested in the academic side of Ethiopian studies and began to write about some of the problems of the country. And this led to my becoming an Ethiopianist. There weren't many political scientists, which was my academic field, who had been to Ethiopia or spoke some Amharic, and I found that to be a very helpful introduction to the country. So I wrote books and articles and attended conferences speaking about Ethiopia. My two major books were Ethiopia, Post-Cold War African State, which was published in 1998, and I'm awaiting a second edition to be published very soon by Sahai, which should come out this year, very shortly. The second book of note was The Line of Judah in the New World, which was the story of Emperor Haile Selassie's connections to the United States and his 6 state visits, a record for a visiting head of state to the United States. I also did an afterword for Clapham's book called Haile Selassie's Government, which came to an end about 8 years before Haile Selassie's demise. And I wrote a rather long addendum to his book, which brought the story up to date. So those were my major academic works, major books about Ethiopia. Of course, there were many articles and talks and various conferences all over the country, all over the world, really. So I had some wonderful friends working in international Ethiopian studies, which gave me an opportunity to travel all over the world, really, and meet with these friends and get back to Ethiopia to visit with academics and people from all walks of life. So I've been very fortunate to have a career that involved this part of the world that I was so interested in, and be able to write and read further about the wonderful people of your country.
Oh, thank you very much, Ted. Thank you for all the things that you have done for Ethiopia. I'm sure Ethiopian people are always going to be grateful for what you have done, for bringing the attention to 110 million people that are predominantly now very young, and it's a country of very young people. And so having somebody like you speak up for them, it's really very, very helpful. And I want you to know that a lot of Ethiopians in my recent trip to Ethiopia really expressed their appreciation and the kind of thought you have for Ethiopia. Let me ask you, because you are really well positioned to be able to know some of the reason, why would the United States, a country of freedom and democracy and fairness and the rule of law, would be interested in supporting a Marxist, officially announced Marxist, and the worst kind of Marxist in that they were following Albanian type of communist in 1985. What led to the United States even being identified with this group and allowing them to come to power in 1991? What was the motivation for a decent country like United States that really works in promoting civil rights and rule of law and civil society to get involved with such a group?
Your question has puzzled many people for quite some time. The United States, as you've indicated, backed up the Tigrayan People's Revolutionary Front, the TPLF, during the end of the Derg. And without American help, I don't think they would have come to power. But they were able to seize control, and the United States perhaps thought they were the least onerous of the possibilities among the groups competing for power at that time. Some people feel they made a great mistake in doing that. Others say, no, the TPLF was the one group that really was able to take charge and continue with governance. My own feeling is that it was an error that to take on the Marxist-Leninist League of Tigray as the standard bearer for Ethiopia seemed a very strange choice. I visited with President and later Prime Minister Meles talking about this very subject, and he was always saying that his group, the TPLF, had gone out and fought to win the victory, and if anyone wanted to rule, they were welcome to do the same. So even though they went through the motions of democracy and freedom, they were running on a very militaristic background. The late Donald Levine and I visited with the Meles several times and carried on this conversation that we reported to others back at that time. But the United States supported the TPLF, which morphed into the EPRDF, and that was the beginning of a long, 30-year reign by the Marxist-Leninists of Tigray. So it's been a very puzzling kind of thing. And then all the problems that ensued from the TPLF reign or government has been problematic ever since. But those are some of the things that I touch on in my writing, in my books, that the TPLF never lived up to its democratic rhetoric. Its ideas that it was going to have free and fair elections and that it was going to respect human rights. So the deficits of democracy and the abuse of human rights have been continuing problems under the TPLF. In 2018, there was a new change of attitude by the ruling party in Ethiopia, and that led to Prime Minister Abiy coming to be the head of the government. And the TPLF went into a very secondary role at that time. They've recently been trying to reclaim their hegemony, which is their favorite word, but that was not to be, and as a result we have the current situation where surprisingly much of the international press comes out on the side of the TPLF, the villains for the past 30 years. So there's much misunderstanding on the part of governments and on the part of international journalists about what is really going on. So I appreciate your work in trying to clarify some of the foggy areas that seem to be cloud reporting on Ethiopia right now.
Thank you, Ted. One of the things that I wanted to ask you, really, because you are really one person that followed Meles and followed all of them when they first came in. Can you tell us a little bit about the election observation that you attended first? Was it in '95 or things like that? And the history of election, and the history of the fake election. Most of it, 100% and things like that. If you can tell us some of the election that took place in the last 30 years.
Right. The first election that had international election observers was in the early 90s, before the new Constitution came to be. And there were a number of irregularities in the election itself, which were reported by the international election observers. The government at that time, the transitional government of Ethiopia, worked with the American Institute of Africa, the American Africa Institute, and they picked a group of observers who, for the most part, were experienced Ethiopianists. So you had people who had worked in Ethiopia in the Peace Corps in Point 4 as missionaries with USAID, different types of academic groups, and they knew Ethiopia too well to be befuddled by the propaganda and the rhetoric of the TPLF at that time. And as a result, there were real questions about the legitimacy of some of the elections in the early days. Then when the TPLF came to power, they had already indicated that in their strategy document that their aim was to win the first election and all succeeding elections. How's that for an aim? So they have done that, actually. And it doesn't matter how they do it, the fact that they do it is significant. The great challenge to them was the 2005 election, when they let the opposition get away with too much. And it appeared that the opposition had done very well in the election, so the government cracked down on the opposing political parties and did not release the record of the voting, and called in military troops to quash protest against the fake election. And that led to probably the blackest mark against the Meles government, because a number of civilians were killed, people were imprisoned, and the TPLF stayed in power, but it did so at a very great price. Thereafter, the elections were pretty much shoe-ins, huge majorities every time for the TPLF or its associates. And one of the funniest ones, after Meles had passed on, Haile Mariam had an election just for a visit by President Barack Obama from the United States. And the TPLF had won 100% of the electoral votes, which is a pretty good record for any democracy. One of Obama's assistants, Condoleezza Rice, almost burst out laughing, talking about the free and fair elections in Ethiopia. And Obama himself was able to talk about it, probably with difficulty, with a straight face. So that's the record that existed up until 2018, when the change came about. Many people were looking forward to free and fair elections in 2020, but the COVID-19 plague put an end to plans for that election. And therein lies the current problem. The Tigrayan, the TPLF, decided to go ahead and have its own election, even though they had been asked to wait and take part in the national general election when the health situation was such that people could get around and participate easily. So they held their own election and said, well, we're the government here, and we don't need the national government to tell us what to do. And then that led to armed attacks on the national security forces, and eventually the warlike situation that ensued, that has just come to an end apparently, and that this leaves the situation very difficult, especially with international journalists and some nations siding with the TPLF, despite all the evidence that the national government had the better hand in the argument. So that's where we are at the moment.
So, in your view, could you think that the government, the Ethiopian government that is, could have done a little bit better in giving access to this restless journalists who are really want to walk into a fluid situation where their own safety might be a danger, and so and some of them might even have a different agenda, but even the risk of having them really attacked or killed because TPLF is keep on hiding in the mountains and doing some damage to aid workers. Why would it be any different to the international community, and what Ethiopia could have done better or different at this point?
Yeah. It would be nice, it would be good if the journalists were able to have free access all over the country. But many of them seem to go in with a bias to begin with, and the national security forces can do no good and the TPLF can do no evil. And until that reporting is sorted out, people, I think, will be misled by what's going on in the eyes of some of the journalists. There are a few that are reporting what I think is a straighter shooting type of activity. And these are the reports that I hope will continue to flourish and give people a sense of what is really happening throughout Ethiopia, but especially in Tigray at the present time.
So what Ethiopians and people who like Ethiopia and what supporters of Ethiopia can do to make sure that this situation doesn't escalate, where Ethiopians are going to feel victims by their own friend, United States, and so that they can really work in reestablishing relationship in Africa with America, and being able to really overcome some of the aggressive situation that's coming from China. What kind of things that the U.S. needs to do? Because it seems like U.S. foreign policy is marked with a lot of unjustifiable relationship with really totalitarian groups and people that are really not working for the benefit of the United States or the people of Ethiopia or the people of Eritrea, any of that. So what can we, how can we help our government, our people in America, to adjust and recalibrate how we...
The people, I think, should carry on in truth as they have in the past, and make sure that people understand what some of the problems are and how the government, national government, has been trying to solve them. The Prime Minister wrote a wonderful book recently about his philosophy of governance, and that lays out, I think, an excellent plan of action for the government reflecting the will of the people being willing to give the benefit of the doubt to their fellow Ethiopians, and to live up to the ideas that the Prime Minister talked about in his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech. It would be good to have Americans return to Ethiopia with groups such as the Peace Corps, USAID, and when the health situation improves, I hope that many of these programs that have been temporarily halted will be able to resume, and people will be able to function again and understand and help one another. The Chinese have done remarkable work. The problem is someone's going to have to pay off the loans, and that may be difficult in the future. That's an indication of the change that's happened in the country. When I was in Ethiopia 60 years ago, people would yell, "Fringe, bye-bye," little kids. Now they yell, "China, China." So there's a different attitude towards who those people are, those foreigners showing up in the cities especially. And the Chinese have done remarkable work in terms of infrastructure work as part of their roads and bridges program. But someone's going to have to pay for it, and there's been mounting debt on the part of people and governments, so we'll have to see how that works out. But the railroads, the subway-like trains in Addis Ababa are good indications of progress in the country. Your skyline in Addis Ababa is so different now as a result of the buildings of skyscrapers. So it's very different from what it looked like when Addis had 250,000 people, and most of them concentrated around Mexico Square. And now we have a new ball game.
It is a big city. What can we help in terms of people like you who are really experienced, the current administration, for example, putting extra pressure on Ethiopia, trying to even take it to Security Council and trying to get quasi something like sanctions and things like that. Why would a government like United States be in a situation to aggravate a friend that has the largest number of UN soldiers, peacekeepers around the world, an airline that is transporting people that are stranded all over the world, an airline that is distributing COVID vaccine all over Africa and Asia, really dedicated workers, and thanks to the TWA group, Americans who set it up. But Ethiopian Airlines is a testament of the work of Americans have done. So why Americans are really going after their own history? Because TWA is really the history of Ethiopian Airlines. And right. So that is kind of puzzling for me to really define why would the United States not be at least neutral and not be taking side like this.
You raise a very good question, which I think deserves a better answer than we've been getting. The history of the United States and Ethiopia has been a remarkable one, with great progress, and as you indicated, help with some of the most important institutions of the country. So why we should turn our back on that history and prefer one province, one section of the country over the national government is a very strange question. And I hope that openness and truthfulness will make it possible for people to see what the real problems are and do something to put them to an end, and convince the U.S. government that going with one particular ethnic group or one particular province is not the way to go. I think the Prime Minister's new political party and his ideas about a nationwide type of activity is much more important than the tribal groups that he inherited from the past. And the TPLF, of course, is one of the worst of those. So I think it's time to move on, go to the national government to reflect what Ethiopia can do when the people are united, as was demonstrated in the Battle of Adwa 125 years ago. When the Ethiopians come together, get their act together, and work together, they are hard to beat. And that's the lesson I hope that will come out of the current situation.
Eventually, we are all expecting that the United States will modify and recalibrate their attitude, because there is nobody else that's better than the U.S. for Ethiopia, just even with the kindness that U.S. showed us to give us home when we were at the lowest, and when the communists made it impossible for us to stay in our homes. U.S. was the only one that really opened up and gave us opportunity. And that's something that Ethiopians would never forget. Even as we work from here, we're supporting our people back home, creating one of the largest income from the remittance from American Ethiopians. And so U.S. is not just a simple country for us. And I hope things will change, as you said.
That's correct, and Ethiopians stepping up into important positions in the United States is testimony to the fact of this wonderful relationship. Ethiopians voted with their feet when they had to leave their homeland. It was the United States that they came to in large numbers. And so many Ethiopians have done well in business, as you have, in academic work. You can go down the list of occupations, and we were seeing this in the latest Congress. Many people commented on some of the Horn of Africa congressmen who were taking part in some of the proceedings at the beginning of the Biden administration. This is indicative of a new era in America and in American-Ethiopian relations. So I hope that those will continue to expand, and we'll continue to enjoy the benefits of your contributions to our gene pool, if you will. So we'll have better and smarter people all the time.
Oh, thank you, Ted. Appreciate you very much. Thank you very much for coming in today and give us an update on this situation. And we'll also always turn back to you when we are confused and we don't know what is the best way to go forward. I think you are really just a star and a light in the lives of many Ethiopians. We are very grateful. Thank you. Have a pleasant day, Ted.
Thank you very much. You do the same.